So let me start recording because this is going to be for the INBA, the Illinois News Broadcasters Association.
Okay.
And so, Julie, you've been working in journalism for a while. How did you get into it?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors that happened. I, as a child, had this unusual fascination with Walter Cronkite. So my mother always tells the story that I would sit in my high chair at dinner and he would come on and I would pay attention. And she thought that was kind of unique for a toddler to pay attention to Walter Cronkite. So that started it there, I think. And then I do have my prized possession, which is his book that he signed for me, which was my prized possession. And then I just was bad at math. So I thought, okay, and I really was good at writing. And I thought, okay, because a lot of people say you're either really good at math or you're really good at writing. You're really not good at both. For some reason, parts of your brain or whatever. So I thought, okay, I'll go into writing. And then I took to creative writing. I liked doing essays. And then I joined the school newspaper as the photo editor in high school. And then I pursued college and I went into a broadcast journalism degree, but I took a minor in poetry just to have some creative outlet instead of who, what, when, where, why. I was a little more creative, which is going to be part of my advice to people. And then I just kept tripping over myself and I graduated with this degree in broadcast journalism, thinking that I was going to set the world on fire in TV. And I kept getting the door slammed in my face by people who would say, well, you really need experience. And I'm like, well, give me some experience. I'm eager, I'm hungry, give me some experience. So the TV thing didn't go anywhere. And then my mother backed into somebody at a brunch who knew somebody at WGN radio, knew that they had this fabulous news internship in their newsroom. And I went in there and I got it and I never looked back. I was sold on radio as soon as I walked through the doors at WGN radio. So iconic. So there's a vibe in that radio station, just like there is at WBBM News Radio. But for a young person trying to get their foot in the door, that was amazing to be working with some of the top professionals in the business at the time. So that was kind of me in a nutshell.
But what attracted you to TV initially instead of radio?
I think initially people just gravitate towards TV because they think, as a kid, I listened to radio for music. I didn't necessarily listen to it for news. So I don't necessarily know if I knew that element was there. Plus when you're in college, somehow they push the TV thing on you a little bit more because it's a little more intense. There's a little more drama to it. It's a little more exciting to a degree because you're on camera, you get to look at yourself, your ego gets inflated. But I think there's a little bit more to TV, so they kind of push you in that direction instead of radio. And for the most part, when I was in radio in college, all I did was disc jockey. Like I would go in and do my hour of playing music, and I basically would put on a Phil Collins album and let it play. And every once in a while, pause it and say, "Hey, you're listening to Phil Collins, and I'm Julie Mann. Stay tuned."
Yeah, but when you went to the radio station and you said you were excited about it, what made it so exciting to you? Over TV.
Okay, so first of all, I'd never been in a live TV newsroom before, but I think the intimacy of the radio station, the newsroom radio station, sold me. I was working very closely. I mean, we're not all over the place. We're within talking distance of each other. The immediacy of it, the voices, the projection, the need to kind of make sure that you could paint a picture in someone's mind as opposed to just turning around and showing them that there's a fire behind you and this is what you're covering. I think I went through elections over at WGN radio. I just thought that this is a place to be if I was going to be in Chicago, because they had their finger on the pulse of the city. And of course, I grew up in the suburbs, so big bright lights, big city. I obviously had been exposed to Chicago my whole life because my father worked in Chicago, and my mother would take us down routinely to the Art Institute and other cultural outlets. But you know what, Margaret, I think you could help me describe it. There's just an electricity that is in a newsroom because you're always kind of on edge waiting for that next big story to drop, right? And you've got that deadline over your head at all times. And you're like, did I do this? Did I do that? What am I doing here next? What goes here? So you're constantly moving as opposed to sitting at a desk and crunching numbers or, trying to make a sale.
Yeah, it's very stimulating. And I know that I've been to TV stations. I've never worked in TV, but radio is definitely more immediate because if something breaks, the person can go somewhere and use their phone now to call into the station and they can get it recorded, or, they can go live on the air. Mm-hmm. And with TV, I think there's more equipment involved.
Right.
To get on the air.
Well, and I kind of like the solo-ness of it too. I mean, I like working in collaboration with people a lot, but there's an independence about radio that you don't have with TV, because obviously you need to have your cameraman, camerawoman with you. There seems to be more spoons in the pot that are churning it up. So you really are kind of left to your own vices when you're in radio, news radio, to get the job done and get it right.
Although nowadays in TV, what I've learned from younger journalists is they have to do everything themselves. They have to do the video and the editing and the writing. So unless they're in a huge market like New York or something.
No. Yeah, one-man band. That's
Yeah. So you mentioned about studying poetry, and you said people should do something creative or study something creative.
Well, I was asked the other day what courses someone should take in college to pursue a journalism degree, and I was kind of at a loss because it's been a long time since I've been to college or been at college. And things have changed so dramatically with the equipment, technology, the digital. I mean, I was reel to reel with a little razor, cutting my audio with a razor and then taping it back together. That just shows you my age. And okay, don't guess my age. But anyways, I thought to myself, okay, so when I went to college, I took all my journalism classes, including broadcast law, which I thought was really intense. I think you get a better sense of the ethics behind journalism if you take a journalism law class. I also took the creative writing because I enjoyed writing, but I also found that people get stuck using the same words over and over and over again. And if you're able to have a creative outlet with words in particular, somehow you reach further for different words and creating sentences differently, while still sticking to the facts of your story. It makes you think a little bit more creatively, I guess, is the bottom line on that one. But I also think government classes are really important for a journalist. I think political science, I think you need to know the history of, Robert's rules and how things work and how to, like nobody ever taught you how to file a Freedom of Information Act. That kind of just came in the industry once you were there. But those are the kinds of things that if you're a journalist, you need to know, like hardcore journalism.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this interview is really primarily for the INBA, Illinois News Broadcasters Association. And they have a lot, if people do join, they have a lot of information about FOIA. So, and there are people who have been through it who can give people advice if anybody wants to know. So, and
that's
they have,
good, yeah.
And they've also had seminars on it and so forth. But okay, I just want to say something about age. You don't have to say your age, but one mistake I made that people shouldn't make, but it really wasn't a mistake, is when you interviewed me and you were talking about cutting tape and you said, well, you're too young to even know that. And I said, no, I think we're the same age. I know you shouldn't say that in an interview because there is age discrimination and so forth, but I never did I got into radio too late to even experience that cutting up. So that's just an aside, but
okay.
But anyway, yeah. So it's another way of saying thanks for the compliment, but I love when people talk down to me. I'm like, okay, I'm older than you, but whatever. So,
yeah, I would take it as a compliment.
It's a big compliment, everybody. So when you got into radio, and did you ever want to do print?
No, actually, I'm telling you, I was sold on radio the day I took that internship at WGN and radio, and I stepped through the door, and I while I explored print in college, I like this simplicity and take that in the way that I mean it, the simplicity of broadcast writing. I mean, it's not that you have to write out every detail of every event. It's get to the point, what matters to people, what's most interesting, what's breaking, what's the latest, what's the new top on the story. And I think that, print, I wanted the immediacy. I guess that's just it. I didn't want to sit around all day and wait for a deadline to pass. I didn't want to have to work on one story all day. I kind of like to be doing 2 to 3 things a day. the amount of things that I learned, and the people that I met in the time that I was a street reporter, immeasurable. I would never give that back for anything.
So what's being a street reporter like?
Um, it can be really hectic sometimes. It can be really fun sometimes. It can be kind of dangerous sometimes. You're going into areas, neighborhoods that you normally would not be going into, but you need to go to get the story. You're in courtrooms, you're in schools, you're in communities, you're in parades, you're in riots. I used to dread the call in the early morning from former morning editor Jim Bennis, who would say, yeah, it's snowing. I need you to go to O'Hare. Nobody else is driving out there because there's too much snow, but we need you at O'Hare. And I said, why do I have to go to O'Hare? Can't I just do something out on the street? I mean, people are more out on the street than they are at O'Hare. So driving in the snow was like one of the worst, because first of all, it was never easy to find a unique way to say, hey, it's snowing. The roads are treacherous. Don't drive, because that's basically it. So I used to find people at the Starbucks who would brave themselves, would brave the elements to get to the Starbucks, and we'd laugh and have fun and tell good stories about that. And I put that on the air, but you didn't know where you were going to go next. I mean, you could be sitting there, ready to go with your one story that you've been working on for a couple of hours, and it's a good story about a teacher who's retiring after 40 years. And then all of a sudden there's a major train crash and you need to pick up and go. And you don't know how long you're going to be standing out there. And it could be really hot. It could be really cold. You could have eaten something. You may not have. You may be out there for 8 hours. Who knows? So really being that kind of general assignment reporter, I loved it. I mean, I did. I loved the spontaneity of it, and the fact that I would get to the scene and really need to make friends with people quickly so that I would learn what was going on. But I think that gives you kind of a good snapshot of what a general assignment street reporter is all about.
How do you know what makes a good story?
That's interesting. First of all, do I find it interesting? And I mean, I know I have particular interests, which again, a good journalist knows their own interests and their own opinions, and they set them aside. So you need to know yourself so that you're not spilling over your own personal feelings into something. But I just always got a sense in my heart that it was a good story. That's, the breaking news stories are, they're breaking news. So they're stories just because they're breaking news. But the feature stories, it's what people are doing that's creative. I always gave people a shot at the air when I knew that what they were doing was unique and innovative and kind of out of the box thinking. And it could be a business, it could be a person who was trying to fundraise. It could be a group that was trying to start up something to stop something or promote something. But I think the individual who thinks differently than other people and comes up with something creative to support their community or their fellow man, I think is one of the best stories. I know that people love animal stories. I don't care what an animal does. That's, if it's terrific, they save someone's life, it doesn't matter. That's always a great story. People like little kids and things that little kids do. They love sports stories and good sports stories. It's just a time of the day to day, as at news radio, we're 24 hours. So it kind of depends on what's happening at the moment. Is it timely? Is it relevant? Or do we just need a good feel good story? Because we've had a lot of hard stories that are tough to swallow on the air. But I guess subjectively, a good story is just that. It's a good story, and you know it when you see it.
And also, how do you write a good story, especially for radio? Because it's not a few minutes. It's usually less than a minute.
Yeah, I think we were down to 40 seconds with a soundbite, so that's pretty quick. It's just a quick who, what, when, where, why, and get the most important part up top. Tell them what you're going to tell them. What makes this, what, if you were going to talk to your friend on the phone about this story, what would be the first thing you'd say to them about it? And what would be the second thing you'd say about it? What matters most? And that's a different animal, again, when you have a breaking news story that impacts a large group of people. That's really important to make sure that you get the latest information that whatever official needs you to tell the public goes first, and you repeat it. And you make sure that you feel like the public can come to you and know that you are telling them, yes, this power outage is impacting you right now. This fire is spreading. You need to evacuate. The storm is coming. You need to pay attention, kind of thing. So it's just each story will have a different way of introducing it, but it kind of just comes naturally after a while. You just kind of know what would make this story sing and how to do it quickly.
And how long did it take you to get to that point to really know gut instinct?
You know, I don't really know. I guess it happened over time at BBM. I was there for almost 25 years. I started as a street reporter / anchor, and I just got better and better as I was out on the street. And I learned from people. I think that's one thing that people don't always do, is that you can continue to learn. I don't care how old you are, and you can learn from just about anybody. You can learn something, and maybe it's not always the best thing. Maybe somebody does something bad, but you learn from that. And maybe somebody does something really good that you learn from. Maybe somebody trips over themselves and you're like, I'm never going to do that. That's learning. And you've opened your eyes and you've allowed yourself to look at it and kind of sink in, so that you know you're never going to do that again, or you'll always do that again. So I think I got a chance to work with some of the best. You know that. So did you. You've been in the business too, and you learn from people who offer their advice and their critical thinking and their compliments and their criticisms. Again, you have to be able to take both.
Yeah, let's say that somebody's starting out and then they get criticized and they feel really horrible. What advice do you have for those kinds of people?
Well, first of all, you got to decide if you're going to stay in the business. I mean, this is what it's all about. That's, this is not, and I don't care what business you're in. You're going to get constructive criticism, and you're going to get unwanted criticism, and you're going to get sometimes criticism that has no value to you whatsoever. But I think everything that somebody says to you, you can judge depending on the respect that you have for that person or the position that that person is in. I mean, if your job is on the line because they don't want you to say something a certain way and you're okay with not saying it that way, then okay, then change it. Do better. You can always do better. And I think there are a lot of people out there that want to offer good advice, and sometimes people don't want to listen when they should. And there's a lot of people who want to be out there to criticize you too, because they want something from you or want to hold you back somehow. And it's your gut instinct that's going to tell you the difference between the two.
Yeah, especially with on air. I just noticed that in radio and TV, of course, there's a lot of envy, especially when people are on the air. And so then some people will become critical of those people to make them feel insecure or something. It's just something I've noticed, but
right.
It's like that in Hollywood too, I'm sure. So, but yeah, when you, how do you not take stuff personally when people criticize you, or when somebody's being criticized, how do they not take it personally?
Well, I think you're always going to take it personally. I mean, that's just human nature. So I think it's just a matter of looking at what the criticism is. Is it professional or is it personal? And yeah, you always want to do a good job. And when you don't do a good job, that you're going to feel that. Nobody wants to make a mistake, and nobody wants to look silly but I think again, goes back to the respect of the person that's offering up the criticism, that if you know that person is doing this because they want you to do better, then I don't think there's a reason to take it personally. Criticism is going to come no matter what stage of life you're in, and it doesn't happen just in business settings. It obviously happens in personal settings too. So it's just it's a human function of trying to remind yourself that you're okay and you're going to get over this, and it's not the end of the world. And do I change? Is it constructive criticism and will I follow it? Or is it just criticism that I'm aware of? And who told me, who said it to me? Again, it's all the respect of the person who's handing out the criticism.
Okay, so you started doing an internship in WGN. What happened between WGN and WBBM?
Okay, so I'll go through this speedy. So I got the internship at WGN Radio. That lasted about 3 to 4 months, I think. Maybe it was longer than that. It was paid. It was great.
Was it a news internship?
Yeah, I was in the newsroom. Dave Ellsworth, Tom Peterson, was there with Steve Bertrand, Judy Pilak. I mean, those names have been around forever, and they are the best of the best in the business, along with everyone at WBBM News Radio as well. I was there with Bob Collins and Roy Leonard and Wally Phillips. And I mean, it was just iconic Chicago radio. So then I bounced to a little radio station called WFXW, which was in the Geneva, St. Charles, Batavia area, which is amazing because they don't have those anymore. And I feel bad about that because I feel truly, and I was going to get into this too, that young people today walk through the door expecting everything to be handed to them. And if they were able to go to a small radio station and understand the functionality of it and what your place is there and learn, I think they would be totally different than coming to, like, getting out of college and immediately coming to a major market. I in some ways don't think that's fair to them, because you're thrown in.
Well, it seems like in TV, there are many more chances to get in smaller markets because actually, even if you look at the job ads at the bigger markets, they require 2 to 3 years experience in smaller markets.
Right. And there are a lot more TV stations in smaller markets than there are radio stations. Most of the radio stations in smaller markets are what am I trying to say? Well, they're music stations, and they have a lot of programming that's already pre-done for them. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to say.
Well, there's a syndicated shows.
Syndicated. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Margaret. It was syndicated. So then I bounced to WFXW, where again, I covered Batavia City Council, I covered Geneva schools, and I covered Kane County government. Funny, right? Because now I'm working for Kane County government. But anyways, so then I bounced to a radio station in DeKalb that was a music station, but had a dedicated news person. So I would go cover meetings at night and come back in the morning and do the broadcast, and I would do their community affairs program. And then I went to WMAQ when it was all news, and I was their overnight anchor. And then I bounced to BBM radio.
So what was it like to what's it like to cover these school board meetings and so forth? It seems like a lot of people do that even for newspapers.
It's labor intensive. It is, because they really get into the weeds with a lot of local issues that you may not care about, but you need to pay attention to and you need to stay on top of. And I would say to any aspiring journalist, go to your local city council meeting, go to your local school board meeting, know how those people function and how they run their meetings and what they're talking about and their agendas, just to see it, because you're going to need to know who you need to go to talk to. Is it the superintendent? Is it the school board president? Do they have a spokesman? Who's doing the talking for the school board? Who's doing the talking for the city council? Then you'll also see what people care about. You go to the city council meetings, you'll be amazed at who shows up for what and who doesn't show up for what. And that's being part of your own community too, which I think people don't take advantage of. But I feel like if there was one positive of the pandemic, it was the fact that people could join by Zoom. So they didn't have to leave their houses. They could Zoom into the meetings and watch what their city council, what their school board, what their library boards were doing, which I thought was a great benefit to expose people and open up transparency a little bit more to local government.
And so then you went to WMAQ and you were an anchor. How did you like anchoring? What's that like compared to reporting?
Anchoring's a lot of fun. There's a lot of pressure on you to pronounce all the words right, to sound like you're authoritative, to make sure you know what you're talking about. It's also important that you know what you're talking about. So if you see something in your copy that doesn't seem right, you fix it.
Were you also running your own board?
Yep, I was, right. And that was the overnight. So you can imagine, again, people want to get into journalism, don't think it's a 9 to 5, because I was just the reverse. I was, going in at 9 o'clock at night and coming out at 5 in the morning. So I guess technically it could be 9 to 5, but you go in the reverse.
You live in Europe or something.
Well, right. So I would go into the radio station at about 7 o'clock at night, and I would anchor until about 3 in the morning. It's a different animal. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to think about on your feet. I was never good at ad-libbing. I give all the credit to people who can, because I just am not good at that. I really need to have a structure in front of me, and whether it's me writing down my own copy or somebody else having something there for me. Breaking news is really, key. You need to know your subject matter too. I mean, because if you need to ad lib through a breaking news story about City Hall and you don't know who the players are, you're in trouble. Or you don't know what the story is, or you haven't been following the story. So for instance, in the case of um, R. Kelly. If you don't know the background on the story, how do you broadcast as an anchor breaking news on R. Kelly if you don't have the background on it? So it's a lot of fun. It is. I mean, you are the voice of the station, right? And you're recognizable now. People know who you are. They hear you. I've forever heard, oh, I heard you on the radio the other day. You know, that's that kind of thing. Even though after I took the managing editor's job, I wasn't on the air anymore, but people used to still say that to me. And I would just nod my head like, thank you for listening. I appreciate
Well, probably
that.
because your name was mentioned.
Probably, right.
Well, then when you were on the air, I mean, obviously people couldn't see you. When you went to a store or something, did somebody say, oh, I recognize your voice or something?
I did that a few times, which I thought was kind of funny because I never thought I would be recognizable for my voice. But a couple of times I was on the phone with people and they would recognize my voice. But it's amazing to me how many people do listen to radio and listen to it intently enough that they know who the players are. Because you can't see them, you really need to listen to know who the people are. And, you know, at WBBM News Radio, the anchors are on for a certain period of time in the morning and then in the midday, in the afternoon, and the overnight. So I was always kind of a little starstruck when people would know who I was, but I was humble enough to also know that I'm a public liaison. I was the person that was supposed to be covering the news and bringing it to the public. I was that person in between. And I think people who get into this business to be a celebrity are way off. I think that's not what you should be doing. I think it's a disservice to everybody, including yourself, if you're going to do that. This is not to get on TV. It's not to make a superstar name for yourself. This is really a public service. News radio is to make sure that the people understand what is going on in their world and that you bring it to them factually and that they rely on you as a reliable source for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry to interrupt, but you know, Roger Badish on Facebook, he said, if you don't sound like you know what you're talking about, your audience can sense it and will have trouble understanding what you're talking about. He was on the air at WGN Radio and he's been on my podcast before. And then you'll lose part of the audience. And then he said, the respect for what the professional really is just isn't there anymore since college grads can't get that real world training anymore in smaller mom and pop stations.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Although luckily we have digital so people can do that. I mean, I always say to people, you know, if you want to do something, if somebody says, oh, I want to do such and such, I'll say, okay, what's your website? Oh, I don't have it. Or what's your YouTube or what's your whatever, Vimeo. And I think there are a lot of ways now to develop skills, even if you don't have the official job yet. And that goes with any kind of broadcasting or entertainment. But
yeah, and I will say as a broadcaster who's on this side of the generation of it, that the older generation of it, that it's hard to keep up. I mean, it was hard to keep up with all the things that you needed to know about podcasting and, you know, going from just the sources that you used to get through email or whatever to now watching Twitter and have your tweet deck and Facebook. And then of course, having to make sure that those sources were reliable and that the facts were true, double check the sources and what have you. But there were just so many more outlets to find news and so many ways to reach your audience. And I'm finding that out in my new job too, that there's a lot that I've become a graphic designer. Who knew? Margaret, come on.
You mean
graphic
what,
designer.
In your new job?
Yep.
Okay, so what are you doing? I mean, what kinds of skills have you acquired in your new job? Or what? Well, first of all, what is your job? I don't even know.
Well, I mentioned a little while ago that I used to cover Kane County government. So I was hired by the Kane County board to become their new public information officer. They have never had a public information officer before, and they hired me to raise the profile of the county and what the county does for its citizens. And so they opened up the door to this office and they said, here, go do. And I did. And I really enjoyed it. The graphic design comes in by doing different designs for Facebook for things that the county is doing. If I'm promoting something for animal care and control or animal care, Kane County Animal Care, I will do a graphic for them. Something for recycling, our Environmental and Water Resources Department, our Division of Transportation. There's any number of departments, the treasurer, you know, your tax bill is due. I would put a little graphic together for that and put it out on Facebook. So that's where the graphic design came into. But for the most part, I'm collecting information. I'm listening to meetings. I'm talking to department heads and elected officials. I'm finding out what they're doing. where they need some help pushing out information to the public, to let the public know what they're doing, how they're involved in certain current events, what things are coming down the way that people would think are important. Feature stories. We have a volunteer garden now at the Kane County Government Center campus in Geneva that a bunch of staff members got together, volunteered, got some donations, put it together, and they're donating their harvest to the local food pantry. But it's a way to kind of collaborate and get together and have a little fun on their off time, but yet also benefit the local food pantries in the area.
And so who is your audience? Sounds like you have different audiences.
I do. It's residents of Kane County, people who want to know what's going on in Kane County, people who are interested. I think it's interesting that I found that on Facebook, for instance, I get the highest number of views from recycling issues. Like,
Interesting.
anything to do with recycling, people go, they just love it.
Did you know that before? Because do you live in Kane County?
I do live in, I grew up in Kane County, right?
So did you know that from living there? This is something new?
No, the best way I knew how to reach people, except through the media, by putting out press releases and hope that the local media would pick it up, these different stories, was to build up their social media pages, because they didn't have social media pages. So please follow us at Kane County Government, by the way, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But so I started to build up the Facebook pages, and I started just to put different things out there to see what people were interested in. And the recycling thing just took off. Anything that the sheriff does, people like. He does a lot at the jail, and he does a lot obviously out and about, and he's really good with compliments of people. So things that the sheriff does, things that animal care, they put a pet of the week out all the time. And they have a great free vaccination clinic. I mean, it's things like that I had no idea that people would be paying attention to. I thought maybe it would be voting. When can I vote? When's early voting? When's the election day? Still of interest, but not as interesting as recycling for some reason. But
well, maybe because Kane County is mellow. I've been there a few times. Maybe because there's not as much drama as other counties.
Well, Kane County is really unique, and not to get into the weeds about this, but Kane County is really unique because we have an urban, rural, suburban community that nobody else has. I mean, we have all of that. We still love our agriculture out here. Our farmers are really important to the Kane County Board, but the urban issues with Aurora and Elgin and manufacturing and commercial development, really important too. Plus our suburban homeowners. We have lots and lots of subdivisions and people living here amongst schools and doing the things that suburbanites do. So we have all of those elements. Plus we have the Fox River, which runs right down the county, and we love the river. And in fact, when they asked me to kind of rebrand the county, give it kind of an identity, that I gravitated towards the river, because that's exactly what we are. I mean, because that signifies industry, but yet rural and suburban, because you see people out there on boats and doing things all the time, fishing.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I mean, I've been to St. Charles, and it's so beautiful how the river goes through, and that I think it's really nice. We have so many waterways, because if you go out west in the southwestern United States, there's not a lot of water out there, so it makes you appreciate how much we have.
Right.
Natural resources.
Right. But so this job, I think, was a natural for me, because I think what they wanted was someone who could come in and kind of pick and choose the things that people would find important. And some of it's kind of, paperwork pushing and not so interesting, but I try to make it interesting so that people understand what the county is doing for them. But it's been kind of fun to pick and choose the stories that I can find that the different departments and elected officials are doing. And I do a lot of writing now again. So it's really being the face of the county is kind of fun, the public information officer. And it's been a challenge. And I have a 6-minute commute to work. So I get 12 hours of my life back a week by not commuting to Chicago. So.
Look, before you continue with describing what you're doing, Jeff Burnett, who's been in journalism for a while, he has a question. Why does news radio work in some markets and in others it doesn't? What do you think of that? He's asking this on the Radiogirl Facebook page.
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I would think it's just a matter of the Well, I would think the size of a community, right? Wouldn't you agree, Margaret? Like Chicago is nonstop. I mean, it's a news maker.
Yes.
So, and there's so many people who need to know what is going on, that I think it's got to be a larger market thing. I don't necessarily know if you can pull off all news in a small community, because I just don't think there's enough to fill. I even look at like TV newscasts sometimes. I see like 4 stories and then there's weather, weather, and then there's 4 stories, weather, then a couple more stories, then more weather. But I think you just have to have the content to make an all news station work in a community. I think if you dedicated a small group of people, maybe you could make it work in a small market. But I think the all news format works only in a bigger market because of the constant content.
But was it like that? Because my dad, he passed away. He was basically around when radio started. That's how old he was. And there was news everywhere, because what happened was he was in high school and he went on some class trip to this local radio station in Canton, Ohio, and they offered him a news job right there. And he didn't take it because he did other stuff. But
was it like all news or was it news talk?
I think it was a news station. I got to look it up. Now it's a music station, but it was many years ago. It was back in the relatively early days of radio. But it seemed like there was news everywhere, maybe because of how news was delivered. So maybe nowadays it is only in larger markets. But when you were starting out in radio and media, was there news? Because you said you worked for a smaller news outlet. So even though it was a smaller news outlet, did you feel like there was enough news to report?
Well, yeah, but the difference between, I think, what your listener is saying is that, is it all news or is it just news? Now, news can play anywhere in any market. I mean, you can make room for news in any market. Can you make room for all news? No, not in every market. I think, for instance, the 2 places that I went in small markets, they had a news department that would give a newscast at the top and the bottom of the hour. It wasn't all news. So yeah, of course I had enough news for a 3-minute newscast at the top and the bottom of each hour. The same thing when I was out in DeKalb, at the other radio station that I was a news director. There was enough to fill the 3 to 5 minutes at the top or at the bottom, not necessarily the whole hour. I needed, that's where the talk came into, or the music.
Okay. And then another thing is that I remember when I interviewed somebody else who's been in news for many, many years, they said that there was sort of a rule in media and in the government where there had to be a certain amount of news on every single station. Do you remember that? Was that required? Do you remember that being a requirement?
That could have been an FCC thing. I don't know that I don't know. I really don't. But I know that a lot of smaller news stations had a dedicated news person. I met a lot of good friends that have come I'm known for years and years and years. And that's why they always say, don't burn a bridge in radio, because there's not that many of us.
That's true. And also another thing I noticed about Chicago, I've lived here for many years. We're in this huge city, and I noticed it's a very small world, because somebody might say something about somebody else and then that person shows up. You're like, oh crap. So people have to be careful, in my opinion. But
well, you need to be careful in life. I mean, that's,
I agree. It's
so,
a small world.
Yeah, it is a small world. But yeah, radio in particular, I got that advice from Ken Kosick, who is a writer for WBBM News Radio, who I've known since he worked in Elgin at the radio station up there. And he was the news, I think there was two of them in the newsroom up there. So again, I worked with him in the Tri-Cities he's in Elgin. I was in the Tri-Cities, and then we worked together at BBM Radio. So small world, right?
Yeah. So. And also, okay. So Jeff Burnett, who I know, he said, thanks for your answer. Julie, my question was geared toward Houston, for instance. Radio 1 tried to do all news on one of their stations a few years back, but it didn't last long. Now, Houston's a big city, and it's actually economically pretty stable. I think more so than Chicago, it seems.
Well, okay, so that's a good point. But okay, so then how many years ago was it that Chicago tried to, somebody came into the market and tried an FM all news station, and it didn't fly? Mm-hmm. And I think it has to do with a format that works, that people know it's a utility. They know that they can get traffic, weather, sports, business. There needs to be news formatted into the all news station. It has to be trustworthy. I don't know. There's any number of reasons why it wouldn't fly in one market and it would fly in another market.
Also, we're not in Houston. We don't know because
Yeah.
maybe I've only been to Houston once in my life, and we're not in Houston right now, and we've never worked in Houston. So I think maybe we could both answer that if we lived there and understood the culture, because it is a very different culture than here.
Well, I don't know if it has anything to do with the culture, but I just think it has to do with radio programming. I think there is a magic to it.
Yeah.
If I can be so bold to say that. But I think there is a magic to the way the format rolls, the way people listen to it, and how many people are in the cars. I mean, a lot of people for BBM radio are in their cars listening to the radio,
Yes.
right? So if people aren't making a long commute, are they listening to it? And was it marketed properly? Were the stories worthy? Were they reliable? Were they trustworthy? Did people recognize the names on the air? Were they making mistakes? Did they sound bad? I don't know. There's any number of elements that play into why it wouldn't work, right?
Well, another thing is, you mentioned WMAQ, and I know that, okay, so at one point there were 2 news radio stations. What happened at WMAQ? It stopped airing, or what happened?
Right. Well, it was purchased by the same people. So they just decided they were going to stick with BBM radio and not with MAQ. So then that's when MAQ turned into the Score.
And the Score is a sports station. So with MAQ and BBM, are there similarities?
MAQ and BBM?
Yeah. Did you notice similarities between the two?
Well, I knew that, I can honestly say they were 2 powerhouses that, my loyalties were with MAQ, WMAQ, which is where Pat Cassidy came from, right? So Pat and I worked alongside each other for a little while because I would, leave in the morning, he'd come in the morning. But MAQ had, I think they were doing the same news, the same type of news. They were covering the same stories. They had a guy out on the street for WMAQ. It was Doug Cummings. And so you would have people out on the street. You would have people doing the same thing, but the format for MAQ was different than the format for WBBM. So that's, I think, where the 2, you either liked the one format or you didn't, because they had, when I was there, they had 15-minute segments. You'd anchor for like 15 minutes and then you hand it over to somebody else for 15 minutes and then you'd hand it back. You get it back for 15 minutes. And if I was to say the biggest difference between the 2 of them was that I think MAQ was a little more laid back. Again, still credible, still covering the same news, still, reliable news source, but they just were a little bit less. I think they were able to go a little bit longer. A little bit
less rigid or something?
Well, I don't know. I think they were able to go a little bit longer with their stories. I think they were able to, they just seemed to flow a little bit more casually than BBM radio. BBM was.
Yeah, BBM, the clock is super tight.
Yeah, right. It was super tight. I think that was a good way to put it, right?
Yeah. And I know that especially because I ran the board for several months for Dave Marcette. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. I mean, how do these people do it? These people are brilliant,
Right.
These on-air people are incredible. So, okay. So back to your current job. Do you get to, since they never had that job before, did you basically get to craft it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. I see that as very rewarding. What do you think?
Yeah, I was kind of scared at first because I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I have to say, one of the other things in life that people need to really pay attention to is be a great mentor. If you can pay it forward, if someone gave you great advice and helped you, pay that forward. And I have got some outstanding people that I have come to know along the way in journalism that I reached out to, and they helped me tremendously build up this office. People who have been in the public relations realm, they've been in marketing, they've been public information officers. They gave me tips. I sent them my press releases. They helped me craft it. They told me to go this way, put a content calendar together, get all these things. I mean, it was amazing. And I couldn't thank them enough. And I really encourage anyone who can help anyone in that situation to pay it forward. If someone has been a good mentor to you, become a good mentor to them, especially, women. I had a lot of women in my life that stepped forward to help me in an industry that's not always known for number one, female voices. But I really was lucky that I had the people in my life that I did, and really gave me the confidence to be the person, the journalist that I ended up being.
So are you talking about even when you got started, you had people helping you out, giving you advice and so forth?
You mean in the new job?
No. In your career, when you started out in radio.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. There were people there. I would say, I would ask them, how does this sound? What does this look? Does this look okay? Does it sound okay? And they were like, yes, do this. And again, that also brought in the constructive criticism, right? It was like, no, I remember being on the air at WFXW, and I had just read a story about someone who had died at a factory accident. And then I came into another story and I started to laugh a little bit, like, oh, and then this next story. And
Ugh.
wow, yeah, no, I got calls left and right, like, don't do that. That sounded terrible. Do you understand a person just died and now you're in? I thought, okay, that was a life lesson. I'll never do that again. So it's things like that you wake up and you say, okay. But I think it was more as I grew as a journalist and there were more people around me that I really got the help that I needed, and people guided me places and told me not to step in that pile over there, but to move down that path. Yeah, so there's any number of people. I can call out one in particular that I always refer to as Deidre White. She was at WBBM for a very long time. She never said no to anybody, which is—
What did she do there?
Who was the assistant news director, and she never said no to anybody. And I know that sounds really like, oh, really? So she got stepped on a lot, apparently. No, she knew how to negotiate. You want something from me, I get something from you. But she never said that out loud. And she got things done in an amazing way. And so when I became managing editor, that's how I modeled my my managerial skills. That's who I got my role model from, because I knew that if you gave something, you could get something back, right? That it was a two-way street, but you just had to be smart about it on how you could get what you want by making sure that other people thought that they got more than what you gave them, but you actually got more.
Wait, so what is it like to manage people? Okay, I've got one more question from Jeff
Sure.
Burnett. Jeff Burnett works in radio and TV, but he works in TV news. But before we go to his point or question, how do you manage people?
You have to have an open mind about people, and you can't take things personally. It's all business. You have to be direct. You have to make sure that you make decisions quickly and that you stick by those decisions, but that you're flexible enough that if somebody makes a good point and you can say, oh, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm going to change my mind on this. You're totally right on this. And I agree with you. So you have to be bold enough to say, all right, I don't know everything. I don't, but I'll make a decision that I think is right. And if I still think the decision is right, you got to stick by it. And people will yell at you. People will get mad at you. People won't talk to you. It's amazing the behavior people have sometimes. But it really is just a positive attitude. I think you just have to keep going and keep a smile on your face and pick your battles, right? You want to make people happy. You want them to work in an environment that's nurturing and they have the ability to express themselves, but yet still get the work done. And in a 24-hour news system cycle, that was hard because luckily Ron Gleason would split the shift with me. So I would do the early morning stuff. And by 7 o'clock at night, everybody knew to call him. Don't call me because I'm up at 3 a.m. So, and if something happened at 1 o'clock in the morning and I could help, they would call me. So, I was on the phone all the time. I think I probably made a decision in that newsroom on a daily basis, like every 5 minutes, I was making a decision.
But now, what do you do when people get really mad at you? Because I noticed that, people will, well, I've been teaching for many years, so the students get mad about stuff, but what's it like to manage adults who are like that?
You address the issue head on, you let them say their piece, you either agree or disagree with them, and then you move on. And if they don't want to move on, that's fine, but you keep moving on and you keep managing them like we're done. This issue is resolved and we're moving on. And if they continue to have an issue, then you got to take it up higher up the chain. I rarely ran into that though, but when you did, that's just how you have to handle it. You have to keep moving. You always have to be the bigger person when you're a manager. And I think that wasn't necessarily a challenge for me because I don't have a problem being, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Because as you know, Margaret, to get me mad, it really took a lot of effort. So I think you just have to keep giving people the benefit of the doubt without letting them take advantage of you, and know the different personalities. It's interpersonal communication skills. You have to know the person that you're dealing with. And that's a lot of work too, because there's a lot of personalities in one newsroom. So you have to be aware of who the person is, why they would get mad about this, and how they're going to react. And by the time I left, I think I could predict when some people would call in sick. I just knew, like, I got that vibe, like, okay, I know this person's going to call in sick, and I don't know why. I just know I knew my people very well. So.
And for the record, I've never called in sick. I've only called in sick. I've had like 5 jobs at the same time, and I've only called in sick once. And the woman didn't believe me. It was at my teaching job. And I'm like, no, seriously, I never call in sick. I'm seriously very sick. I've got a very bad cold.
You are a super hard worker, Margaret Larkin. I can't say that enough. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm putting that on the record because I see people call in sick when they're not really sick. It's really disgusting. But anyway, and I have sick days now, but I still don't take them. Okay. So, now another thing, the woman who was saying that, she didn't say no, so she can, whatever, she it's not manipulated, but how do you balance giving people what they want, but also getting what you want?
Well, for instance, if somebody needed to be off the clock by a certain time, and I knew that was going to be difficult for me, but I really wanted to make sure that they got out of there a little bit early because they wanted to go see their grandchildren, or they needed a doctor's appointment, or they really had an event that they wanted to go to, I would think about it. And then I'd say, okay, well, I've got this I need done. Can you grab that for me if I do this for you?
And they'd agree.
And they'd agree.
That's a good idea. Very good idea.
The same thing with the schedule. The same thing with scheduling people. If you need them, they want a day off and you can do that for them, but you also have a need for something, then you can say, hey, well, I'm happy to do this if you can do that. And typically people would be fine with that. They just, they know it's a give and take. And if they can get that done without any controversy or someone saying no, what they want you to do is say yes. So many times they'll do what needs to be done to get you to say yes.
That's true, because one time I had to fill in because somebody didn't show up or something, and so I filled in the newsroom, and then I calculated the hours that I just gave to the company, and I said, can I go to a Sox game? So then I filled in, and then I used those hours to go to a Sox game, and I split up my day and called it a day, so it was fine. It worked out.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now I just want to bring up this point. So Jeff Burnett, Mr. Media guy, who's very passionate about radio.
I love it.
Yeah. And he's like in TV. He said, do particular news stories drive ratings, or do news radio stations air certain stories to get higher ratings during certain periods? And he works in TV, so I'm sure he experiences this.
Yeah. Well, we have ratings periods, I think, well, at least I can only speak for WBBM News Radio, that I was the managing editor, and I don't recall putting a story on the air because I wanted higher ratings. I put a story on the air because it was relevant, it was timely, it was interesting, people needed to know something, it was an update, it was a kicker that would make people laugh, but I don't think there were things that we covered because we needed to cover them. Like, for instance, and I wasn't there in the newsroom for this, but the approval of the casino in Chicago, the approval process in the casino in Chicago, did that get attention? Did that get ratings? I don't know, maybe, but we had to cover it. Did the arrest of Rod Blagojevich get ratings? Yeah, because people were interested in it. Did I put it on the air to get ratings? No, I put it on the air because it was breaking news and the governor had just been arrested. So I think there's sensationalism that goes on places. I don't think BBM was one of those places. At least I didn't subscribe to that. In fact, I was a lot more conservative than most people would have liked me to have been. And when I mean conservative, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about, do I put the sound of gunfire on our air? Is that beneficial to anybody? Did you need to hear that? Did it help you out understand the story anymore? With a mother screaming about her dead children, a family talking about someone who was just murdered. I don't know. I didn't subscribe to that. So I didn't put that stuff on the air. I didn't feel like that was adding to anyone's benefit, that you were learning anything new from that it was beneficial in any way. So I would say, no, I didn't put things on the air that I think we did put stuff like the difference makers. I think people really like that. That was a great idea by Ron Gleason.
Yeah.
And the Made in Chicago's, I think those have something to do with ratings because people enjoy those stories.
Yeah. Basically Jeff, who's worked in more music radio and he works in TV news. I think it's more of a TV news thing, but I've never worked in it. So Jeff, we can turn that question back to you. And
Yeah.
Jeff, you should be a guest on the INBA podcast. I'm going to bother you again. But anyway, because he's the one that got me to start the podcast. But anyway, so but with the news content, how did you set up what you wanted to do? Did you know what you wanted to do at 4 a.m. or did it roll out? Did it develop during the day? Did you have like a set schedule first or set structure first and fill in the gaps, or what did you do?
Well, I relied on our editors primarily for that. I think as the managing editor, my main responsibility was to make sure that we had the right stories on the air, that we need the stories that we needed to have, and that the reporters were out covering the stories that we needed to have. And then to fill in the holes where we had features and things that were going on, and localizing national stories. It's hard to describe how to put a newscast together because you really don't know what it's going to look like until 10 minutes beforehand, right? So you just know that there are top stories that you need to cover nationally, internationally, and locally because they're obvious. They're either breaking or they're developing or they're updating, and things that people are talking about. And then you just fill in the gaps with things that, as we talked about earlier, stories that you find interesting. The dog that saved the family from the burning building, the paramedic that revived a child with CPR, the people that are out doing wonderful things for their communities. And so it's a fabric that you have to weave, but you weave it together at the last minute. And that's why news radio is stimulating, because you never know what you're going to get next. Mm-hmm. And it's just as exciting for us as it is for the listeners sometimes. But I think also BBM has really been a utility. Again, people know that if news breaks, that's the place to go. Mm-hmm. I mean, no doubt, hands down, BBM has always been top at breaking news, whether it's national, international, or local.
So you mentioned briefly what it's like to work on the other side. So now that you're not working in the media and you're working in a situation where you'd like to get media attention, what's that like?
It's a real challenge. I was surprised. So, here I am, this 30+ year journalism career, left, the top rated news station in Chicago. I write up my first press release. I put pictures with it. I write it myself. I write it in broadcast style. I send it out and, crickets. And I thought, well, what am I doing wrong? So yeah, it's been kind of a challenge. I didn't realize, I think newspaper newsrooms are different today, and they'll be the first to say that too. They're scaled back, they're understaffed, they're undermanned for reporters. So sometimes I think it's just a matter that they didn't see it, or they had other things in the fire. They were stoking the fire with other things first, and they just didn't get to it. I've been lucky though. I've had some local reporters who know where to find my stories and know that I'm putting stuff out there that listeners would want to look at. I'm sorry, readers would want to look at. But yeah, it's been a challenge. I went before a group of public relations people a couple of weeks ago, and I said the same thing.
Was that PRSA?
What?
Was that PRSA?
No,
Public
it was
Relations Society of America. Okay.
No, I think I've spoken before them before, but this was just a group of Park District public relations people. And I said the same thing to them, that I really have a great new understanding of what it's like to be a public relations person, trying to push a story and getting nowhere. So
wow. Yeah. So now you know why people called you and emailed you so much when you were
exactly. Right. So I apologize for all those people that I didn't respond to.
So so when you were a news director and you were active in the media, you got awards. What was that like? Or you got public recognition. What was that like?
Well, Margaret, I'll be the first to tell you that I didn't like to be recognized. I like to fly below the radar. I remember the first time I met Robert Feeder, who's obviously the TV media critic in the area. I met him for the first time and he looked at me and he's like, how do you keep getting, you're not in my vision. Why are you not? This is the first time we're meeting. And I mean, I've been around for a while, and I think it's just because I find it humbling to not not to step forward and look for accolades. I can tell you that the first award I got that was a major award was for a horrific crash that happened between two planes over Lake Michigan. And I thought, and it was for breaking news. I got it. I don't know if it was a Murrow Award or AP Award. I can't remember now. It was significant, but insignificant at the same time. And I don't mean to diminish anyone who gets an award, because there are a lot of people that deserve those accolades. But I thought to myself, why am I getting this award for a story about this tragedy? And I thought, this isn't right. I didn't feel good about that. So I didn't really seek out any further recognition that way. Robert Feeder was extremely generous to me by naming me on a list of powerful women in journalism in Chicago.
Yeah, that's huge.
That was really unexpected, but appreciated. I got a lot of nice emails and notes from people about that. And I was very humbled by it. But again, I didn't really seek out any attention for what I was doing. But that's just me. That's just who I am. I don't necessarily like to raise the flag and wave at everybody. So.
But it seems like doors open to you in terms of speaking. Like, I would love to be invited to speak somewhere, to tell you the truth. I mean, it seems like you'd say, oh, I'm going to go to this thing now. Oh, what are you going to? I'm going to speak at such and such. Like, really? Wow, that's cool. So that's neat.
Well, I think the best things that I've ever done in my life in terms of speaking were to younger people. I loved getting asked back to my high school, St. Charles East High School. It was just St. Charles High School at the time. But I enjoy talking to younger people about things. I always start off with, the best thing that you could ever do in your life is show up on time. That is the easiest way to show respect for other people. And it's really important to do that, to establish the fact that you respect that person's time.
Yes.
So I enjoy, I do. I've had a lot of opportunities to speak to people. I guess what I have to say is interesting. I don't know. Are you having fun at the podcast right now?
Yeah. And actually Jeff has another, he's a complete, really, you guys, I know I keep saying this, but he's extremely passionate about radio and media and so forth. He said, I'm sorry for all these questions, but I love the Q&A style. What's the future of news radio? Younger audiences are gravitating to streaming and away from traditional AM FM, even though traditional radio is still number one in the car. Will station groups still be behind news radio in 10 to 20 years? Or will streaming sources start offering news radio? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think streaming services are already offering news radio, right? The BBM radio is on a stream, right?
And a lot of stations are throughout the US and Canada.
I think that, honestly, I think news radio is always going to be relevant because, again, we're a utility. You know where to go. I mean, I remember being in, I guess it was Florida, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, and I was in my car and I couldn't find any station that was breaking in with that news, that was bringing that news. So I think for the breaking news value, for the traffic, the business, sports in particular, I think there's a relevancy there that will stick, because I think once you become a taxpayer and you're interested in what's going on in your community, and you are on the go and moving around, and everyone's going to always, for the next 20 years at least, people will continue to commute. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where people are going to be sitting at home all the time like we did during the pandemic. I just don't think business functions well that way. So I think news radio's got a solid foot in the door for a while.
Yeah. And also you're right. I mean, when people get older, especially, well, in the city of Chicago, I've never lived in Kane County, obviously, but, you know, it's very political here, and we have aldermen and so forth. And, you know, in Evanston, my hometown, they have aldermen too. And you really want to know what's happening in your ward, and you want information, and you don't want to be deceived as a resident. So yeah,
well, I think there's nothing more embarrassing to anybody. And I think this would go for everybody. And you don't want to be caught not knowing what's going on. I mean, when the worst thing in the world is when somebody says, did you hear what happened over here? What do you think about that? And you're stunned. It's like those people that the late night talk show hosts ambush on the street with a question, and they look like they're completely uninformed about what's going on because they have no idea what the person's talking about. There's no worse feeling in the world than not knowing what's going on. And I think news radio will fill that niche for a long time to come, because people need to know what's going on in their world. I mean, they just do. Otherwise, what do you talk about? Besides, like, what's on Netflix? I don't know.
Well, yeah, a lot of people are talking about what's on Netflix, but okay. And then no, you've been giving advice here and there about, okay, I want to go back to the paying it forward concept. Why a number of people will call it pulling up the ladder. Like some people get success and then they think, okay, well, it took me a long time to get here and I don't want to share it and I don't want to lose what I have and I really don't want to help anybody out. But you're saying that people should help people out.
Of course.
And okay, you say of course, but what about, the fact that maybe somebody helps somebody out and then that person who's being helped out, they eclipse the person who's helping them. There's this paranoia going on, especially with some people I've noticed in the media. But what do you think is good about helping people out fundamentally?
Well, being selfish about it, it makes me feel good. I mean, it makes me feel good to know that I've helped somebody else out. Like it's a selfish thing for me, but I really feel good about helping other people out when I have the opportunity to use the resources and the knowledge and advice that I've been given over the years and pay it forward and give it to somebody else and they use it and actually succeed. If someone's threatening my position and I want to help them, I'm still going to help them. I mean, I should feel secure enough in my own position that the advice that I'm giving them will only make them better, but then I become better too because I'm an educator. I mean, you can teach, you never know what you really know until you try to teach it to somebody else, right? So I've always had an open door policy with people who want help. Now, there's a lot of people who've come to me for help that I know didn't want the help and weren't going to use my help. And I offered it to them sparingly because I knew that wasn't, they weren't going to use what I wanted. They were coming in for a different motive. They had a different motive for why they were coming to me for help. And I think people can tell that. They can tell genuine, when people reach out in a genuine way than when they reach out for selfish reasons to better themselves for reasons that aren't better for the organization or for what you think that what I'm twisting my words here, but you get my point. Like there are people that will take your advice and actually use it. There are people that just ask for your advice because they want to seem like they care and they want you to think that they're interested, but they're really not.
Yeah. And then also sometimes people are helped and then they fumble. I mean, they're not what you think they are. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the other thing too. That's really good. As a manager, I never hired people before. And as BBM managing editor, I hired a lot of people. And there are a lot of people out there that will put themselves out there to be somebody they are completely not. And it's shocking to me. And I thought, wow, okay. And maybe I was naive at the time. I'm not naive anymore about it, but it was very surprising that they would want to put themselves into a position that they knew they couldn't handle. And a lot of people think that they are, their egos are bigger than what their skill set is, but it's really, it's surprising that, I used to say to people, okay, so this is, for our entry level position, the assistant producer, you need to be here at 2:30 in the morning. That doesn't mean getting up at 2:30 in the morning. That means you are downtown, parked in your seat, ready to work, 2:30 in the morning. You really need to think about that. And I'm hiring this position and you need to say to me that you will come in and do this 2:30 a.m. shift. Now, granted, as you know, Margaret, we have 2 other shifts too. But so as soon as I hire the person and train the person, then they all of a sudden can't do the 2:30 in the morning shift anymore. And for a variety of reasons. And I think to myself, wow, if I had committed to a job and said to somebody I was willing to do this and I was hired under the pretense that I had committed to doing this, I would be embarrassed. So
yeah, but then some people, yet even though they dropped the ball, sometimes I see those people moving on to other things and they're still succeeding. But whatever, what goes around comes around. But
well, and that's fine. Maybe you trip at this job and you succeed elsewhere. That's fine too. But I just think that if you're going to commit, at least be honest about it. Be like, hey, you know what? This is just not working out for me.
Yeah. And by the way, everybody, I have shown up at 2:30 and it's rough. However, that morning shift is the best. So I really liked it. I'm not doing it currently, of course, but so, what other advice do you have for people who want to get in the media or they're in the media, they're frustrated, etc., or even people who want to do what you're doing, who work for government or who get a position created? I mean, how do people get those opportunities?
Well, it's, the advice varies from the audience that I'm talking to. If it's a younger audience, I have different advice than an older audience or somebody who's actually in the industry. I think that honestly, journalism is something that you really need to be dedicated to in your heart. And I know that's kind of wishy-washy emotional stuff, but it's true. It's a hard job and it requires a lot of attention to detail, a lot of learning on your feet. You got to listen to people. You have to ask questions. You have to be challenge yourself to step up and say, hey, I didn't understand what you just said, or what you just said didn't make any sense. And you're saying that to the mayor of Chicago, right? So you get yourself into a position where you have to confront people, and that's not easy for people. I personally don't like confrontation, but I do it because that's what my job is. It challenges me, and meaning confrontation that is essential to getting to the bottom of the story and getting the facts right. This is not an easy job if you are in TV or radio. Again, as you said, we're 24 hours, or BBM is 24 hours. So you got to be able to wake up early in the morning, stay up late at night. The TV people are up really early in the morning. They're working really late at night. It's something that you really need to have flowing through your blood and you really want to do. And you really need to know that, again, as I mentioned before, this is not to become a celebrity. It's to be a public servant, not in a government sense, but in a sense that you are that liaison between what's happening in the world and the people that live in that world. And I took that very, very seriously because I think people otherwise wouldn't know what was going on in many cases. And again, the showing up on time, I just think that was always a stickler for me.
I agree.
It was the easiest way to show someone respect. And when people didn't do that, it was very disappointing. And
yeah, because I did one time I had to train somebody and I seriously thought they were not going to show up. And when they did show up at least half an hour late, I filed it away. Like, I will never recommend this person because it's very basic.
Well,
unless like they're in an accident or something.
Well, and there's an old saying of, your first impression is your only impression, right? So that's bottom line. And that for me was showing up on time. And showing some initiative. You always need to show initiative. If there's something that you can do to step outside the box and say, hey, look, you know what, I can do that. I can pick that up. I can do that with no problem. And then showing some ingenuity, showing some way of figuring out a problem without having to go right to the IT guys or right to the engineering department or right to, to ask for help. Try to figure it out yourself first. I mean, that doesn't apply to all industries. I mean, if you're in manufacturing and the big machine, the combine breaks down and you don't know how to fix it, don't try to fix it without asking somebody. But in journalism, if there's, your recorder isn't working or the computer isn't working, or there's a better way to do a Zoom interview, or, I always find that it was easier just to try to figure it out myself than to try to bother other people, because honestly, then you broaden your knowledge of the things that are going on around you. How can I fix this to make it better? And we had a lot of people at BBM Radio who did that they really knew how to kind of on the fly fix things. I know that I can tell one story in particular, and I know we're kind of running out of time here, but one person who will go unnamed.
Well, this is online. There's no such thing as running out of time, but go ahead.
Okay. So however they did it, they changed their iPhone to Polish. So it was only in Polish. Everything was in Polish. And they called me and they said, I don't know what I did, but my phone everything's in Polish. And I said, okay. So I just went online and looked and how to change, the language of your phone. Yeah. But that was probably the best.
Did they have a punch key after that?
What?
Did they have a punch key after that?
God, remember we used to get those in the newsroom and I'd be like, please, that just put 5 pounds on me just looking at those.
But what's funny is you can get a punch key anytime at any Polish bakery, but this is a special time during Lent or before right. Lent that people do that.
Right.
But, and then any other advice what about advice for getting the call, you're plugging away in your life. And then, because I just talked to somebody yesterday who got the call as well. They just got this incredible offer and at this incredible place, and they were just doing their job. They weren't even looking for it.
And that's great. That's great. Then you decide if that's what you want to do and you do it. If you have a passion for something, follow it. I in my life, I wish I was a bigger risk taker. I I ended up doing exactly what I wanted to do and live the life in my career that I wanted to live. And I got very lucky because of that. But you need to be a risk taker. And you also need to know that you are entitled to nothing. You are entitled to nothing. You get what you work for. And it's not, and life isn't fair, and jobs aren't fair, and things don't always work out the way you want them to. But if you keep working hard, somehow what comes around goes around. And again, I know that's kind of karma-ish, but it's true. I really feel like you can set your own destiny and figure out the way to get to the place that you want to go, but you got to put in the work. You got to try hard. It's not going to be handed to you, and complaining that it's not fair and I'm entitled to this never gets anybody anywhere, and nobody likes to hear that. So
yeah. And then also, what about working, working other kinds of jobs? Like, so right now you're not working in journalism. Do you have any advice for any work-life advice for that situation?
Well, I think, again, I would make sure that you have a great board of directors. Who's on Margaret Larkin's board of directors, right? I've got a board of directors, and they are from people of every walk of my life. And I know that I can turn to them and ask them for advice and ask them if I'm right or wrong, and they will tell me. I can trust them. You need people in your life that you can trust, number one, so that if you're making a decision, you feel like confidently. If you're not sure you're making the right decision, you have people who will help you make that decision for you. Then don't throw people away. Keep contacts, stay in contact with people, reach out. Again, that goes back to the mentoring thing, pay it forward. You never know when that person's going to be important to you. Like, these people were in my life when I needed help putting together this Office of Public Information. They stepped up right away. They spent a lot of time with me, and they were willing to answer my questions anytime I needed them answered. And you have to be willing to ask the questions too. I think that's a hard thing for some people to do, is to ask a question and kind of that, which indicates that you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know what you're doing, or somehow you aren't educated enough to understand what's going on or figure it out yourself. I would say, and that kind of flies in the face of what I just said, to figure it out yourself before you ask for help. But I meant that kind of on a more technical, after you're involved in the job, on the job thing. Don't just scream for help, because you can try to figure it out yourself. I think you need to know you can find people, and that just goes for everybody. Maybe you say hello to the mailman, say hello to the security guards downstairs at Prudential Plaza. They were the greatest people ever for me. I got some of the best stories just listening to them, not stuff that I would necessarily put on the air, but it was great to interact with them and converse. And talking to people is human nature too. And I think that not enough people talk to each other. They just walk past each other. And I think it's nice to be able to sit and talk, even if it's for a couple of minutes, with just strangers. And I know, Margaret, you're good at that. You enjoy talking with people. Obviously, the fact you have this podcast, but you take great interest in your fellow human. So I think more people should do that. And I think the more you expand your horizons that way, the better educated you become, and the more you learn about yourself.